Next on our list is again from the majority. The chair recognizes the Honorable Ralph Recto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Speaker, to our economic managers. Good afternoon. I will be very quick, Madam Chair. First, let me congratulate our economic managers for their presentation, and I congratulate the President for appointing them, who I consider investment grade economic managers. No? So thank you for your presentation today. Just a quick point, Madam Chair. I noticed that the budget increase as far as the obligation is only about 4.8%, and the disbursement is below inflation of 2.6%. So following up the point made by Congressman Salceda, how do we expect the economy to grow by a real growth rate of 7% next year if the government would seem to be a drag on that 7% economic growth, considering that our budget increase is much lower than the growth rate that we expect?
I believe it's NEDA who runs the growth estimates. Secretary Balisacan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Let me note that insofar as this year and next, we expect that the growth is largely consumption-driven, household consumption in particular. About 70% of the growth in the first half could be attributed to household consumption. So as pointed out earlier by my colleague, Secben, the share of government is really quite small. And as I also pointed out earlier, there's scope for further boosting that growth with further reopening of the economy, especially that it's encouraging that investment confidence is strengthening. And if we are able to continue opening the economy next year and get this investment going on, especially we are counting on private sector investment in particular to take a greater share of that total investment. I think that it's very much doable. I also note, Madam Chair, that if you look at the rapid growth episode of our country from 2010 to 2019, before the pandemic, a large part of that was also much consumption-driven and the services sector from the supply side. And it's not so much correlated with global headwinds. In fact, the correlation, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to be so technical here, but it's only 0.11. So this tells you that a lot of this thing that's happening in the growth is quite domestic. And so that's where we are counting on, at least. And the other thing that really makes me quite upbeat about the medium term, Madam Chair, is that we have entered already the so-called demographic sweet spot, where the working age population is growing faster than the total population. For example, working age is growing at 1.9% now. Total population is growing at 1.6, 1.7%. Now, if you can get investment going, that demographic shift adds a boost to the capacity of the economy to grow. So the trick there, Madam Chair, is really that the private sector must be engaged.
So in effect, the short response is that we expect the private sector to take the slack. Now,
Private sector.
wouldn't there be an inconsistency in the sense that here we are, the government is fighting inflation, the central bank is raising interest rates, which would have an effect of tempering consumption, tempering growth to address inflation? Isn't that the case? I mean, you cannot have your cake and eat it too, isn't it?
No.
Secretary Balisacan.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think that we are looking at this in the medium term, that clearly any increase in investment in interest rate will dampen investment. An increase in inflation will dampen consumption. But the damage done to the economy in the medium term is much more if inflation is.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
My point is that when we increase interest rates, that dampens investment and consumption. So following up from the point I raised earlier, isn't it that it should be government to lead the economic growth at the moment?
Yes, yes.
Rather than rely on the private sector because we're increasing interest rates?
We
That's
would
the
like
point,
to
yes.
see investment, the actions of government, the priorities of government targeted on those that can unleash the potential in the private sector. I mentioned these critical constraints to growth that have been issues for so long. Bad infrastructure that leads to high cost of doing business. Energy is a major problem right now. I mean, if you can't get the energy investment in the energy sector going in the next couple of years, then let's forget the growth. This high growth. That's water is also a major issue, despite the fact that we are surrounded by water. And so on and so forth, and also this issue that private sector always raise, the regulatory issues and those things that we can do to address the ease of doing business issue. I think that I would rather want to see the government spending move in those directions so that the potential of the private sector can grow even more, and focus also on social protection. That's for the government, especially for health and education. Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you for your response. I noticed as well that there is a portion in the budget that we do have an unprogrammed fund of roughly 588 billion. Now, if we add that to the 5268, then the budget is, there's a 16% growth rate. Because when we pass the budget, this is really an authority to spend, giving the president the authority to spend, diba? Now, why is it that the DBM submitted an unprogrammed fund of roughly 588 billion? What are the chances of this being spent as well?
DBM?
The release of the budget under the unprogrammed appropriation will trigger when there are excess revenues from the national government, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, do we expect a part of the unprogrammed to be spent next year? Do we
this year?
expect a part of the unprogrammed to be spent next year?
DBM?
BTR. I suppose, Mr. President, because this year, for example, we were able to fund or generate excess revenues, and we were able to fund some of the projects under the unprogrammed appropriations.
Yes. And when we say excess revenue, that includes borrowing?
DBM?
No, Mr. Chair.
When you say loans, does that include, can you, if we have perfected additional loans, would that be part of revenue and therefore you can spend the unprogrammed?
DBM?
Yes, di ba?
Secretary
Could I
Jokno.
explain? There are two cases where you
Yes.
can spend the unprogrammed appropriations.
Yes.
One is if there is excess revenue over what has been programmed, right? So that's one case. The other case is if you have new loans.
Correct.
and
So
there's-
borrowings, pwede.
Borrowings, pwede,
Diba?
pwede. Oo.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, and the reason why I bring that up is because to achieve that 7% growth rate, you may have to spend the unprogrammed.
Could I reply?
Yes.
First,
Secretary
on the prior question of Senator Recto, Congressman Recto. You know, what am I going to say? there has really been a structural shift in our economy because of what you've done, okay? You have path-breaking new legislation, liberalized the economy, and so that could, in fact, accelerate the entry of foreign investment in the country, especially the Public Service Act. Secondly, in the past, I noticed that agriculture has been a laggard, okay? It's in and out of recession. Now we are focusing on agriculture, so that could be another source of growth. And at the same time, in the past, we have not invested in mining. Now mining is open, and that's another growth sector. So there are many growth sectors,
Yes.
possible growth sectors, in response to your
Yes.
answer.
Thank you for your response, and I agree. I do agree with you with some of those observations, Madam Chair. A final point, because we have limited time. I noticed in the BESF, even assuming we grow by 7%, the unemployment rate will increase. Why is that, Secretary Balisacan?
Secretary Balisacan?
Yes.
The reason for that is that a large number of our population are expected to enter the labor force, especially those who are on the K-12. Many of them will join the labor force when they graduate next year. So that's the major pattern that we are seeing, Madam Chair.
Secretary Balisacan, do you mean that the full effects of K-12 will be felt only next year by way of an additional increase in graduates? And so that's a reason for why you are expecting a higher unemployment rate in 2023.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
That's
And finally,
what-
so if we do not grow by 7%, all the more we expect unemployment to go higher.
Not necessarily, because that growth now will create jobs, but the jobs that will be created at that point in time will just not be enough to absorb all these new entrants. And I think that what can also happen, Madam Chair, is that the labor force participation rate may also be expected to rise as the economy now enters a kind of a sustained growth path.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I have no further questions for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Recto.